Two colossal forces stand poised for collision. If World War III erupts, it could be sparked by a high-stakes standoff between the United States and China, two countries already locked in fierce competition over trade, technology, and global influence. While both powers claim they don't want war, they continue to bolster their military might. As tensions escalate in the South China Sea, the world wonders, are we on the brink of global disaster? Or is this just a high-stakes bluff? In today's episode of the Infographics Show, we delve into how the US and China could ignite World War III. The most perilous stretch of water on Earth spans the 100 miles, 160 kilometers between mainland China and Taiwan. Every day it grows more congested, with warships engaged in a deadly game of chicken. Sometimes, this game turns violent, but not in the way one might expect. On August 11, 2025, the Philippine Coast Guard learned this lesson firsthand. Just 10 nautical miles, 18.5 kilometers off Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea, what appeared to be yet another routine clash with Chinese forces soon turned into a shocking event that sent ripples through defense ministries from Washington to Tokyo. A Chinese guided missile destroyer and a Coast Guard cutter, both rushing to intercept a Philippine vessel, collided at high speed. The crash was spectacular. The destroyer sheared off the bow of its own cutter, rendering the ship severely damaged and unfit for service. Debris scattered across the choppy waters. The Filipino vessel involved had been simply delivering fuel and supplies to over 30 fishing boats. Yet, this humanitarian mission somehow triggered a crash between warships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In their reckless attempts to intimidate the much smaller Philippine patrol boat, the Chinese forces had destroyed their own vessels. Meanwhile, U.S. Navy ships routinely conduct freedom of navigation operations in Chinese-claimed waters every month. These patrols are not meant to provoke direct confrontation, but rather to show that aggressive maritime actions have consequences. When great powers begin ramming their own ships in pursuit of fishing boats, it's time for cooler heads to step in. What's most astonishing is that, in context, the incident wasn't a total surprise to the international community. The Taiwan Strait has long been a cauldron of brinkmanship and competition. Chinese fighter jets scream across an invisible line meant to maintain peace. Taiwanese pilots scramble to intercept them. Radio frequencies crackle with tense exchanges in Mandarin and English. Chinese warships tail every American vessel, using confrontational intimidation tactics that turn routine patrols into tense, high-stakes interactions. Ships maneuver aggressively in waters no wider than Lake Michigan, but with 10 times the military hardware and 1,000 times the political stakes. The numbers speak for themselves. In May 2024 alone, China deployed 111 aircraft and 46 naval vessels around Taiwan, with 82 Chinese military aircraft crossing the median line, the ADIZ, an unofficial boundary that has become the world's most militarized region. By August of the same year, Taiwan had detected 464 Chinese military aircraft buzzing the island, with at least 300 crossing into what had once been neutral airspace. But it was a seemingly routine February morning in 2024 that showed just how quickly tensions could spiral out of control. Chinese Coast Guard vessels spotted a Taiwanese speedboat near Kinmen Island, where fishermen were going about their daily tasks. What happened next almost triggered a war. The Chinese vessels pursued the Taiwanese speedboat, which, overloaded and panicked, capsized in rough seas. 2 fishermen drowned. For 48 hours, both sides mobilized additional vessels. Taiwan deployed patrol boats. China responded with larger Coast Guard cutters, their crews armed and ready. The world held its breath as diplomats scrambled behind the scenes. Eventually, both sides found a face-saving way to back down, narrowly avoiding a crisis that began with a fishing boat. But what if it had been a destroyer instead? Tensions escalated further in June 2024, when Chinese sailors stormed a Philippine naval vessel delivering supplies to a World War II-era outpost. Armed with knives and axes, they smashed communication equipment and injured a Filipino Marine, severing his thumb. Pentagon officials were forced to consider whether this act constituted an armed attack warranting U.S. retaliation under mutual defense treaties. A clear pattern was emerging. Chinese vessels close in, as they always do. At least, that's the narrative everyone but Beijing is following. Taiwanese, Filipino, or other regional forces respond. Radio chatter escalates. Ships weave dangerously. Aircraft circle overhead. Then it happens. One reckless turn, one radar glitch, one pilot pushing too far, and suddenly, casualties demand retaliation. President Xi Jinping has made it abundantly clear why China cares so deeply about Taiwan. According to him, Taiwan will be reunified with mainland China not through peaceful negotiations, but by force. Xi has insisted that reunification is inevitable. So, the question is not if, but when. Us intelligence officials believe Xi has given the People's Liberation Army a deadline to take Taiwan by 2027. What once seemed like military theater is now transformed into operational planning, with a countdown ticking away. China claims 90% of the South China Sea, based on historical maps from the 1940s. By that logic, Italy could claim the entire Mediterranean. But China backs its claims with the world's largest Coast Guard fleet. China has built the largest navy by hull count, constructing ships at a pace that would make America's World War II shipyards envious. Their newest type, O-55 destroyers, pack 112 vertical launch cells, more firepower than most nations' entire navies. China has turned disputed reefs in the South China Sea into unsinkable aircraft carriers complete with runways and missile batteries. Chinese state television regularly airs footage of amphibious assault exercises that look suspiciously like Taiwan's coastline. Amphibious landing vessels resembling Churchill's famous Mulberry harbors are shown offloading tons of military equipment and vehicles reminiscent of D-Day. Military parades showcase DF-21D carrier killer missiles, specifically designed to sink American aircraft carriers. The message couldn't be clearer. China is no longer just talking about reunification, it's training for it. America now finds itself ensnared in a promise made decades ago when the stakes seemed much lower. The Taiwan Relations Act commits the U.S. to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. It's a deliberately vague phrase that sounded reasonable in 1979 but feels like a ticking time bomb today. This policy of strategic ambiguity has created a diplomatic minefield, one that would be comical if the stakes weren't so deadly. Officially, the United States recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole government of China and acknowledges, not endorses, Beijing's position that Taiwan is part of China. At the same time, America treats Taiwan as a sovereign state in everything but name. When Taiwanese officials visit Washington, they can't use the front entrance of government buildings or display their flag. They enter through service doors. Yet, these same officials coordinate billion-dollar arms deals and share classified intelligence with Pentagon generals. The contradiction reached absurd heights in 2022. When then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, despite furious Chinese threats, Beijing responded by firing ballistic missiles over Taiwan and conducting military exercises that effectively blockaded the island for days. Yet, on paper, nothing had changed. Washington stuck to its one China policy. Even as it signaled it would risk nuclear war to protect an island it doesn't officially recognize as a country. The military reality tells a different story, a story that's far from ambiguous. America has $22 billion in approved arms sales to Taiwan, all sitting in the pipeline. American military advisors are actively training Taiwanese forces, and U.S. warships transit the Taiwan Strait on a monthly basis, labeled as routine operations, but everyone knows they are much more than that, shows of force. This raises the impossible question: can America really abandon an ally? It has spent decades arming and training. Any U.S. president who allows Taiwan to fall without a fight would face immediate impeachment calls from both parties. But any president who chooses to defend Taiwan risks nuclear war with China. Congressional hawks have made backing down politically The Taiwan Relations Act may use diplomatic language, but the politics are clear. Lose Taiwan, lose your presidency. Military analysts have simulated the most likely scenario for conflict. And it doesn't begin with bombs or bullets. Begins with a phone call from a cargo ship captain to his company headquarters. The Chinese Navy is demanding to inspect our cargo. What should I do? Chinese warships could complete a full maritime blockade of Taiwan within 24 hours. Here's how it could unfold. A routine People's Liberation Army Navy exercise unexpectedly expands. Chinese destroyers and frigates begin intercepting all vessels approaching Taiwan. They don't call it an invasion. They call it a quarantine to prevent military supplies from reaching separatist forces. The world would suspect the real purpose, but no decisive action is taken at first. Diplomats would debate, but not decide. The squeeze would be immediate and devastating. Taiwan imports 98% of its energy and 70% of its food. The island's 23 million residents would face shortages within days. Gas stations would run dry. Power plants would shut down for lack of fuel. Hospitals would run low on critical supplies. The choice would be clear: surrender or starve. Now, imagine the captain of a U.S. Navy destroyer approaching the blockade zone. The Chinese consider these waters their own, and every maneuver carries immense risk. The captain faces the most consequential decision since the Cuban Missile Crisis: break through the line and risk firing the first shots of World War III, or turn away and watch America appear to abandon its allies in real time. Deep down, there's no good choice. Retreat would undermine U.S. security guarantees. Advancing could spark a nuclear war over a shipping lane. Once the shooting begins, domestic politics would make backing down almost impossible. Xi Jinping has spent years telling the Chinese people that Taiwan's reunification is inevitable. His legitimacy as leader hinges on this promise. Any American president who appears weak on China would face instant political death from opponents, branding them the leader who lost Taiwan. Modern military operations have a momentum of their own. China would need to coordinate the most complex amphibious assault in human history, synchronizing air, land, and sea forces with cyber and space warfare. Once these forces are in place and ready, military commanders would face enormous pressure to act or risk appearing weak and indecisive. The timing would only make matters worse. Modern conflicts move at digital speed. From the first shot to full-scale war could be just 72 hours. That's not enough time for diplomats to fly between capitals, hold emergency sessions, or negotiate compromises. In 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev had 13 days to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis. Today's leaders might have 13 hours or less. History offers a chilling parallel. In 1914, European leaders genuinely believed they could fight a limited war after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Mobilization schedules and alliance obligations made that impossible. Today's version runs on fiber optic cables and satellite links. Cyber attacks, missile strikes, and space warfare can all unfold simultaneously, escalating faster than any human decision-maker can control. The alliance domino effects are eerily similar to the past. An attack on Philippine forces could trigger the same mutual defense clause that dragged America into Afghanistan after 9/11's. Japan conducts joint patrols with Philippine vessels and provides radar systems to Manila. Australia's ANZUS treaty obligations would put enormous pressure on Canberra to honor its alliance commitments. What starts as a local scuffle between Chinese and Filipino sailors could easily escalate into a global conflict involving nuclear powers within hours. Let's return to the hypothetical. The captain of a U.S. Navy destroyer is given orders that could trigger World War III. Chinese warships have encircled Taiwan, and the government wants the destroyer to test the blockade and break through. As the ship nears the point of no return, the captain has no idea that responding to routine warnings will trigger the most sophisticated and consequential military operation in history. Somewhere outside Beijing, a cyber warfare officer receives a single green light. The naval confrontation about to unfold in the Taiwan Strait is suddenly about far more than ships. Moments later, the destroyer's GPS shows it miles from its true position. Communications with the Pentagon are down, and radar begins to display phantom vessels while missing real threats. The invisible opening strike of World War III has already begun. China's military doctrine has been designed for exactly this kind of multi-domain warfare: coordinated strikes across land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. This means that when China battles America in the waters of the Taiwan Strait, it's also fighting in cyberspace, outer space, and the financial markets. As U.S. ships steer toward what could be the most dangerous naval confrontation in recent history, Chinese hackers are executing coordinated attacks on targets that most would never even consider. Back in the United States, most Americans are asleep, completely unaware that their country is already under attack. Chinese cyber warfare units have spent years, decades, in fact, gaining access to American utility companies. planting digital time bombs in over 55,000 electrical substations. The timing of the attack is no accident. As the captain of a U.S. Navy ship gives the order to fire on the deck guns, Chinese hackers simultaneously initiate the strike on America's power grid. Remember the chaos when hackers shut down the Colonial Pipeline in 2021? Gas stations ran dry for days, and people waited in mile-long lines just to fill up their cars. Now, imagine that same scenario, but instead of a single pipeline, power plants in Texas, water treatment facilities in California, and cell phone towers across the Midwest go dark at the same time. The attack is instantaneous and massive, and America has no choice but to respond. In the heat of this cyber warfare, U.S. Navy ships send warning shots across the bow of a Chinese frigate. The Chinese respond with their own warning bursts. Within 3 minutes, both sides are shooting to kill. As tracer rounds light up the Taiwan Strait like deadly fireworks, the cyberacts intensify. GPS satellites, which guide everything from smartphones to military drones, begin broadcasting false coordinates. Communications? Satellites suffer mysterious malfunctions, though these are no accident, as they're being deliberately jammed by Chinese space warfare units. It's a 21st century war fought with 21st century weapons, and America is left blind and deaf. Billion-dollar destroyers, packed with the most advanced technology on Earth, are reduced to fighting by sight alone. When Americans on the eastern seaboard wake up and try to check the news from Taiwan, nothing loads. The internet is down. In an instant, millions realize that the battlefield has crossed the Pacific. For many, the thought of a paralyzed digital world is even more terrifying than facing China in open war. Think about how much of your daily life depends on technology. Your morning coffee bought with a credit card. Your commute guided by the convenience of GPS. Your paycheck deposited electronically every 2 weeks. Your text messages to friends and family. In the span of a single morning, all of it stops working because 2 naval captains started shooting at each other halfway around the world. Wall Street attempts to open for trading, but the financial system is under full assault. Bank accounts are being drained by artificial intelligence programs. Credit card networks crash. Trading algorithms are manipulated, triggering massive. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummets 3,000 points in the first hour. Every international bank transferred trillions of dollars. Every day flows through something called the SWIFT messaging system. Chinese intelligence has spent decades mapping these networks, and when the shooting starts in the Taiwan Strait, they flip a switch. Trillion-dollar transactions between American and allied banks simply stop. Within 72 hours of the first shots being fired in the Taiwan Strait, every major country on Earth is forced to choose sides in a war that nobody wanted. How? How could the world have gone from routine military patrols and diplomatic talks to a global crisis on the edge of all-out war? The answer lies in the far-reaching consequences of decisions made in the heat of a rapidly escalating conflict, and the interconnectedness of modern warfare across all domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. Japan realizes that Chinese missiles could strike their major airbase in Okinawa within 10 minutes. They face an impossible decision: allow American forces to launch counterstrikes from Japanese soil, which would make Japan a legitimate military target, or expel their closest ally and face China alone. Australia invokes the ANZUS Treaty for the second time since 9/11. The Australian Prime Minister has hours to make a decision that would typically take weeks of parliamentary debate: risk Chinese nuclear submarines off the Gold Coast, or abandon the alliance that has protected Australia for 70 years. Within 48 hours, the USS Ronald Reagan, a floating city worth $4.5 billion, carrying 6,000 people, steams toward the Taiwan Strait. It's sailing into the crosshairs of Chinese carrier killer missiles, specifically designed to sink American aircraft carriers' ballistic missiles that can come screaming down from space at hypersonic speeds, carrying warheads powerful enough to penetrate aircraft carrier armor. By hour 72, Chinese submarines outnumber American vessels 3-1 in Pacific waters. But the war, already expanding, is about to become truly global. The logical course for the world's leading economies would be to cut China off from the SWIFT banking system, much like Russia was after its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. But there's a problem. China processes $19 trillion annually through SWIFT, 5 times Russia's volume. Shutting China out of global financial systems wouldn't just hurt China. It would trigger a global depression that would make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor hiccup. China controls 80% of rare earth mineral processing, the elements that power your smartphone, electric car battery, and American military equipment. A Chinese embargo would cripple American defense production within months. Additionally, China builds 40% of the world's commercial ships. If Chinese-controlled vessels simply stopped sailing to American ports, store shelves would empty within weeks. Things are already looking grim, even before you consider the conflict's nuclear dimensions. China has about 410 nuclear warheads. The United States has over 5,200. That may sound like a clear victory for America. Right? Wrong? In nuclear warfare, having more weapons doesn't matter if your opponent only needs a few hits to cripple your economy. A single nuclear weapon hitting Shanghai or New York would trigger a global recession. What's truly dangerous is when both sides believe they can contain nuclear escalation. China believes it can use limited force for limited goals. America believes it can always escalate higher than China is willing to go. When both sides believe they can control nuclear war, that's when nuclear war happens. In practice, this plays out just as you might expect. Chinese submarines sink a U.S. aircraft carrier, killing 6,000 sailors. America retaliates by sinking Chinese naval vessels. China then authorizes a single nuclear strike against a U.S. base in Guam far from American cities, but sending a clear message. America responds with a demonstration nuclear strike against a Chinese facility. Both sides think they are being restrained, but the other will back down. That's how nuclear weapons get used, through reasonable decisions made by each side, believing that their actions will end the crisis. There is no way to win a war between nuclear superpowers. Unlike World War II, you can't occupy China or America. You can't force unconditional surrender when both sides have enough nuclear weapons to end civilization. The choice is still ours to make. But according to the Atlantic Council's latest survey of over 350 global strategists and security experts, that window may be closing faster than we think. 40% of these experts expect a world war within the next decade, one that could go nuclear and extend into space. Even more alarming, 65% believe China will attempt to retake Taiwan by force within the next 10 years, up from 50% who believed this a year ago. Nearly half of the respondents expect nuclear weapons to be used somewhere in the world by 2035. These aren't random guesses from internet commentators. These are the people whose job it is to understand global security threats. And they are telling us that the unthinkable is becoming increasingly probable. The war would likely end through mutual exhaustion, with both countries economically devastated, politically unstable, and militarily weakened. But the damage to the global system would be permanent. The economic collapse, the breakdown of international trade, the refugee flows from failed states, and the environmental damage from cyber attacks on infrastructure alone would affect every person on Earth for decades. World War III could begin with a single spark, a collision between ships, a cyber attack gone wrong, an automated system making the wrong decision, a decision that spirals too fast for anyone to control. The most terrifying aspect of a US-China conflict is that once it begins, no one on Earth could escape its consequences. In the end, the question isn't whether anyone could win such a war, but whether humanity could survive it. If China does make its move on Taiwan, the world will be on edge.